Welcome to Excel Magic Trick number 1128. Hey, if you want to download these files and follow along, there's two of them. 1128 Aging Start, 1128 Data Source Start. Now, we're going to start with looking at the finished result because we're going to create some aging of accounts receivable reports. Here's our database: customer, amount, invoice date, due date, and number of days late. And we need to extract on separate sheets all of the customers with 1 to 30 days late, all of the customers with 31 to 60 days late, 61 to 90, and 91 days and above. So 4 different reports. We want to create these with formulas so they're automatic. They will pull the data from the original data source. All right, I'm going to close this file. We're going to start from the beginning. We have two files. We're going to start with this 1128 data source start. This is the file we get exported from our database or QuickBooks or Access. All right, we're going to get this data, import it into the other report workbook, create our formulas, and we'll be good to go. Now, when I get this report each month, I actually want to convert it to a table over here. In case we change any of the records here, it'll be dynamic. So I'm going to click in a single cell, field names at the top, records and rows. The keyboard is Control-T. Click OK. This will create dynamic ranges. Now I want to name this table Alt-JTA. Notice it brought us to Table Tools, Design, and there it is. I'm going to call this Fact Aging Table, Enter. All right, so this is our source workbook with all of our data. Control-S to save, Alt-F4 to close. Now let's import it. Data, and we can go from Access in the Get External Data and change the extension down here to All, navigate to our file. All right, there's our file, Excel Magic Trick 1128 data source start. Double click to start our import. It sees the sheet name F Aging Tables. That's the sheet name. I gave the table that name also. Click OK. Now it's going to import it as a table, which is fine. Click OK. Instantly we have this table. Now this will be dynamic here for our formulas, but it's also connected to a dynamic data source. Now we want to name this table too. Alt-JTA. I'm going to give it the same name. Notice it looks like it's got the name from the other place, but I'm going to name it here F Aging Table and Enter. Now, when we create our formulas, our table name, that's the name we'll use. We'll also use our field names, and those will be in square brackets. Now, the first thing is, here's our template for our report. Actually, I'm sorry. The first thing is we got to create our extra column called Days Late, Enter. And we're going to do our formula equals the due date minus the invoice date. Notice the table formula nomenclature or structured references. That @ symbol with the field name in square brackets means get like a relative cell reference. When I hit Enter, it should have copied it all the way down. Guess I have my settings set such that they didn't. I'm going to double click and send it down. There we go. Now the nice thing about this is the original data source, if it changes at all, it'll re-import and keep this column just fine. Now, before we can build our array formulas, and by the way, this is going to be a doozy of a set of formulas. We're going to have to count lower criteria, upper criteria. We're actually going to look through this column, find all of the days that are between 1 and 30, extract the records to this report. But first, we need to count how many there are. So I'm going to use the COUNTIFs, a function that's been around since Excel 2007. Click on the top cell, Control-Shift down arrow, Control backspace to jump the screen back in view. And there it is, our table name, and in square brackets, our field name, comma. Then in double quotes, I'm going to say greater than or equal to n double quotes. So the comparative operator requires that we put it in double quotes. And we have to join it to our lower n. So we use the join symbol, Shift 7, and I click on 1. So our first criteria is greater than or equal to 1. Comma to get to our second range. We can type our ranges out to FA down, down, tab, and then a square bracket. And I can use my down arrow to get days late. Probably easier sometimes if you're not a fast typer to just go ahead and highlight it if you can, but it's nice to know how to type them out. So that'll be our second criteria range. Move that little screen tip, comma, and then criteria 2 is in double quotes, less than or equal to, in double quote, join the upper number. Notice both of these are included, the 1 and the 30. Close parentheses, Control Enter. So there's 24 records. Now that'll update. If we change the records here or in the other table, that number will update. Now we're going to use that because we're going to actually create some array formulas over here that get pretty big. This will be our trigger for as we copy the formula down when the formula stops running. So after row 24, down here, we don't want to run the huge array formula because it takes a lot of computer resources to do that. So after row 24, we will stop running our array formula. Now we're going to have two different formulas here. This one will extract just the numbers between 1 and 30. And then these two will extract the information for customer and invoice number. The invoice amount. All right, so we're just going to start off with looking at the large function because our goal is to extract 1 to 30, but I want to see the biggest ones on top. Now, I can't highlight the whole column because that would give me the biggest one, like 107, and that's not within our criteria range. So we're actually, before we dump all of the values from this column into that array argument, we actually have two conditions. We have to filter the values just so we see 1 to 30. So we're actually going to use the if function twice. By the way, at the top of the column, you see 2007. This formula will work in 2007 and earlier versions. For the rest of the formulas, I'll use a much better method of aggregate. And I'll actually show you the exact parallel formula for this for 2007. Because once we start slapping array operations into the logical test of if, we're going to have to use the special keystroke Control-Shift-Enter. Aggregate will allow us to use the large and do array calculations, but we won't have to do any special keystroke. All right, let's start this off. We highlight Control-Shift-Down arrow, Control-Backspace, and I'm going to say anytime you are greater than or equal to, and I'm going to click on the number 1. Notice when we're doing a direct array operation, I do not have to put the comparative operator in double quotes or use that join operator. Now I want to hit F4 to lock that. That's the first logical test, comma. If I just had one criteria, I'd put the values there, but I don't. I have a second criteria, so I put a second if. Control-Shift-Down arrow, Control-Backspace. Less than or equal to, boom, our 30. Now, comma, and now I can put the values if true. Control-Shift-Down arrow, Control-Backspace. Now notice we have value if true, comma, value if false. We don't want to put that there. If we leave it out, if will automatically put the falses in, which will in essence be our filter. Now I'm going to close this off. Notice I still see the screen tip, and that colored parentheses is not the same as the first if, so I type another one. Now let's just check this out. Let's click this and hit F9 and look what we get. Oh, the falses filtered out numbers like 107, 46, 43. But notice the first number we get is, well, we can see it up here, 21. Then we get a 26, 28. So it's seen 21, 26, 28. That's how we filtered our values to meet our two criteria. Control-Z. Now we can simply say comma and the K we're looking for. It is, give me the first one, then the second one, then the third largest, then the fourth largest. Close parentheses. It looks like I forgot to lock this. F4. Now, if I hit Enter, it might give me an answer from implicit intersection, but that's not correct. And the reason I know it's not correct is because when I select the cell and look up here, I don't see the curly brackets for this array formula. Remember, the if function, when you put array operations in that logical test argument, you have to use Control-Shift-Enter. So check this out. I'm going to tell Excel this is an array formula. Control-Shift-Enter. Now I can see the curly brackets. So Control-Shift-Enter was me telling Excel this is an array formula. Those curly brackets are Excel saying, hey, I understood this is an array formula. And we get the correct answer. Now I'm going to double click and send this down. The problem is we get num errors. Now watch this right here. That's a big array formula. Sometimes it takes a lot of computer resources to calculate, but right here to get that num error, I'm running this big, huge array formula. I could use if error here to get rid of this error, but that means I'd actually have to run the formula, and I don't want to do that. That's why for most formulas where you're extracting data with array formulas, you want another way to determine whether to run the formula or not. So I'm going to put an if at the beginning, and I'm going to say if logical test, if this number right here is greater than this count of 24 F4, notice that's the logical test. That means I'm past row 24, comma, then the value, if true, is double quote, double quote. That's the syntax to show nothing. It is a 0-length text string, comma. Otherwise, the value of false, which means we're in row 1, 2, 3, to up to 24, then run the whole formula. All right, you ready? Close parentheses at the end. I see that it's black. Control-Shift-Enter. Double click and send it down. And there we have our numbers. All right, now, the alternative over here, I'm going to scroll over here. And I want to use a 2010 formula. So I'm going to put this in edit mode. And I've already done some heavy lifting here. So I'm going to copy and use the clipboard. That's one of the array operations. Control-CC to open up the clipboard. I can see it's highlighted over there. Then I'm going to, boop, on the logical test for the second one, Control-C. Then I'm going to come here to values if true, Control-C, escape. Now, I want to look at this alternative. All right, equals aggregate. This is in place of the large. Now, we have a choice of functions. 1 to 13 do not allow array calculations, but 14 to 19 do. I want large, comma. Whereas with our if formula, we use the false for the filter. We're going to use divide by 0 errors, and we need to not have that mess up our formula. So the second argument options will be 6, ignore errors. And here's our array. Now, what are we trying to extract here? Numbers. So I'm simply going to click on that. That's table formula nomenclature or structured reference. And I need to divide that by our criteria. Now we have 2 criteria. So I'm going to put 2 parentheses. And the first one goes, it doesn't matter which order you do it, right? Boop, I'm going to click there, close parentheses, and I'm going to multiply. Now notice I wanted to do this multiplying before the division. That's why I put that second parentheses. Open parentheses, click on the second one. I think I got it right. Yeah, that's it. What happens here with multiplying is when it sees a true here and a true here in the same position, true times true will be 1. True times false. False times true or false times false will result in a 0. Let's just check this out and highlight. Actually, put close parentheses on the bottom. Highlight this bottom part, F9. You can see it's filled with 1s and 0s. Of course, dividing by 0 will create an divide by 0 error. So I'm going to highlight the whole array, F9. And there's my filtered values. Up here in the formula bar, you can see divide by 0, but there's the 21, the 26, the 28. Absolutely beautiful. But remember, we're using divide by 0 as our filter. Control-Z, comma, K, close parentheses, Control-Enter. Now I'm going to actually have to copy this one down. So I Control-C, scroll all the way down to the bottom, click in the before I click in the last cell down here, I'm holding Shift. Now I click, now I Control-V. Look, there's that num. I'm going to come over here and cheat right from the beginning. Get that if all the way to the 0-length text string and comma. Control-C, escape. Come over here right before the aggregate. Control-V. And then come to the end, close parentheses. I'm going to use Control-Enter. Now, wait a second. I just told you about this aggregate and the magic of it, and I completely skipped over an important step. Control-Enter. I didn't use Control-Shift-Enter, but immediately look up here. I don't have any curly brackets. I don't need them. That aggregate function understands it. And it's not just the avoidance of that special keystroke in those curly brackets. It means you're not going to have to worry about errors from implicit intersection and things like that. Double click and send it down. So we can see, boom, same exact result. So if you have the choice, in later versions, definitely go with aggregate instead of if inside of a large. Now, our next formula. We have one more formula that we'll be able to put into that cell, copy it over and down. All right, now we're going to do something similar, but now we're looking something up based on this criteria, 30, 30, 30. I'm going to look through here and say, is anything equal to 30? If it is, then please go get the customer and the amount. All right, so I'm going to scroll over here. You ready? I'm going to look this up using the index. So the array are the items that you want to look up. And check this out. I'm going to click in the first cell, Control-Shift, down arrow, Control, backspace. But I want you to think about how this table formula nomenclature works. That looks like an absolute to us, but it's not. You have to do something really tricky with 2 square brackets and a colon for absolute. But that's not what we want. We want a formula that when we copy it down, it's locked on the customer. But when we copy this formula over to the side, it should move to invoice amount. Well, guess what? That's the default behavior for this table formula nomenclature. Right now, with just the table name and the square brackets, copy it down, it's locked. But if you move it to the side, it moves to the next column. It's as if the default is a mixed cell reference. Now, that'll work, comma. Our row number, aggregate. What we want here is not large. We want small because we're actually going to be matching these 30s. And I don't know where the first 30 is. Maybe it's relative position 68. But there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. So there's 4 relative positions. Now notice this function argument row number, that is asking for the relative position. If I'm looking through this customer, I need to know, is it the first record, the second record, the third record, right? So this aggregate wants to find the first occurrence of 30, then the next one, then the next one. So we're not going to use large. We're going to use small, which is 15. All right, the first relative position, second relative position, etc. Comma, we still need to avoid our divide by 0 errors, so 6, comma, and then our array. Well, what is it we're trying to get? We want relative positions, and here is the relatively well-known way of getting an array of all the relative positions. I'm going to click over here. Same customer, Control-Shift, down arrow, Control, backspace. Now, right now, this is the row function. If I were to highlight just the row function, it's going to look through every cell and report every single row, F9. 2, 3, 4. It's not going to work like that because I really want 1, 2, 3. But I need to retain the actual official number of rows from that table. Control-Z. So what am I going to do? I'm going to say the row of that whole column and subtract row of the first one, which in this case it's just boop. And notice it F4 to lock it. Now it's given me the row of A2 is 2. So if I were to highlight this whole thing in F9, now it's 0, 1, 2, 3, which is still off. Control-Z. So now I add one back in. That's a relatively well-known method for inside the formula of creating an array of relative positions. Now we need to close that off in parentheses because we need to force that plus and that minus before the division. And now we only have one criteria here, so 1 parentheses. Anything in here, Control-Shift, down arrow, Control, backspace. Are you equal to? Now this cell reference, when we copy it to the side, needs to be locked. But when we go down, it needs to be relative. So I'm going to hit the F4 1, 2, 3 times, lock the column, but not the row. Close parentheses. Now, if I just created this whole array right here, right now it should give me all divide by zeros except for the 4 positions where we have these 30. So F9, and I can't look through all this. It's way down here somewhere. Where is it? Now, look at this. I'm looking at this, and I don't see any numbers there. Control-Z. Let me look at the formula. Oh, there it is. See that? It should be here. Watch this. I'm going to point to the edge with my move cursor and point to the 30. All right, now let's try it. F9. And there we should have, oh, there's 148, 156. So there are some positions. Control-Z. All right, comma, and then the K, meaning the first one, second one, third one. Well, we can't use that because that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're actually going to have 1, 2, 3, 4. And then when it gets down to 28, it's going to have to be 1, 1, and then 1, 2. So what are we going to do? In the K argument, we're going to use COUNTIFs. And what are we counting? Criteria range. Well, we're going to need an expandable range. So I'm going to click in the first cell and then type a colon, comma, and then click on the H7 again, close parentheses. Now, right now, if it's looking in that range, it gets 1. But I need it to expand as I go down, so I'm going to lock. Now, I have to be tricky here. I'm copying this to the side and down. So the first range, F4, locked in all direction. But this one right here, when I move to the side, it needs to be locked. But when I copy down, it needs to move. So F4, and we'll give it a column lock, but not the row. And same for this one. F4 key 1, 2, 3 times. So the idea behind this count ifs right here for the K is now it gets 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1, 1, 2, which will be perfect. All right, close parentheses on the aggregate. That's the row number, close parentheses on the index. Let's just enter this. And we don't have to use Control-Shift-Enter. I'm using Control-Enter because I want to put it in that cell. Drag it over. Oops, there's a problem. Let's see, F2. Now we can see the problem is right there. It's customer. Let's just go look here, F2, and what was it when we entered it? The date, and you can see the purple. Ah, that is the default behavior. Look, it goes back to the first column. That's the purple one. So this is a situation for table formula nomenclature where you have to lock it. So we're going to have to go back to this one. And for our date late, we're going to have to do absolute referencing. Square bracket, come to the end, colon, open square bracket, DAA, down arrow, tab, square bracket, square bracket. Now I put a semicolon instead of a colon. And there you could see once it lights up in that lavender, that's an absolute reference. Control-Enter, copy it over. F2 to look at this, and it looks like it's working. There we have locked it. Now let's double click it. Actually, before we do that, let's add some formatting. Control-Shift-4 for currency. Highlight, double click, and send it down. As we scroll down, there's our num arrow. Now this is a lot of formulas. These are all array formulas. I do not want to run all those, so I'm going to use the same exact trick. Steal it right from here. Copy, escape, F2. Right at the beginning, Control-V. But now we want that G7 to be locked this way, but not this. So I hit F4 1, 2, 3 times. All right, I got my fingers crossed. I come to the end. The value is false is the array formula. And by the way, the reason this is so nice is below this row 24, it's running a logical test and then dumping a zero-length text string into the cell and never touching that. Absolutely awesome. Control-Enter, copy it over, double click and send it down. Oh, I can see I've destroyed my formatting. Control-Shift down arrow, Control-Shift-4 for currency. All right, let's check this out. That is amazing. Now let's copy it. And actually, we're not going to copy it. I'm going to cut it. I built it on this sheet just because it's easier. But now that I want to move it, I'm going to go like this. Control-X to cut. Come over here, Control-V. Looking good. Now I'm going to copy it, not cut it. Come over here, Control-V, Control-V, Control-V on each one of the sheets. Now I can come over and change the criteria, 31 to 90. Absolutely beautiful. 160. Come over here to the 61 days to 90 days late. 60 deadbeat customers between 61 and 90 days late. And this one, I'm going to type 91. Did I get those right? This is 30. 3190, yeah, OK, so we got the upper end. This one's simply going to be 91, and then I'm going to put some ridiculously big number. For our company, we never let anything go further than 365 days. Then we put it to bad debt, so we'll just put some big number there. And instantly I have 1, 2, 3, 4 reports extracting from this sheet right here. If we were to change something here, this 107, Just to see if this works, I'm going to change this date right here, 1/22/2014 tab. So that should be, let's see, 24 to get it into the first report. And so dang Trista better be on this report over here. Dang Trista right at the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Control Z, Z. We got back to the 107. I'm going to close this. Control S, Alt F4, just to go back to our data source. Double click our data source, open it up. Here's our table. Control down arrow to get to the bottom, and I'm going to add a new record. This is an Excel table, so if I add new records to the bottom, it will be incorporated in the update to the other workbook. So here it is, GG owes $1,000. It was due on 5/1/2014. Due date 5/12/2014. Control Enter, Control S on this table. Close will open up our report. Now it's not updated automatically, but check this out. It's going to be somewhere down in here because it's probably about 10 days past due. Go to Data, Refresh All, and there's a keyboard. Notice Control Alt F5. So we're going to do that right here. Control Alt F5. And instantly it updates from the other workbook. Man, that was a lot of fun with aging of accounts receivables. Excel tables in this workbook and the other workbook. Data imports. Big array formulas, the Excel table feature, and of course our formula table nomenclature. Man, that was a lot of fun. We'll see you next trick.